You know, our vision is very clear. Like, we want to be the first real-time global payroll platform in the world. Nobody's got anywhere near it. We've gone from basically zero to 35 million in that period of time in contract recurring revenue, all organically.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Deal Maker Show. So today we have a very exciting guest. I think that the story that he's going to be sharing with us is quite remarkable. Everything starting from like really spinning off a very exciting business out of the company that he was working previously. But again, I mean, the growth that they have experienced is remarkable. So I guess without further ado, let's welcome our guest today, Ruairi Kelleher. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks a million for having me.
So originally born and raised there in Dublin. So how was life growing up there?
Yeah, very. Yeah, I like a lot of time. I really like Ireland. I had an American mother, so I did get to spend quite a bit of time on the west coast of the US, over in San Francisco, visiting my grandparents at the time. But yeah, outside of the weather, Dublin is a great place to grow up. I still live here today, so I think that tells a lot. That you know, glad to be here. It's actually sunny today, and so that's a rarity here. So when the sun does shine in Ireland, it's one of the best places in the world. So if we could just get that all the time, it would be great. But from a living perspective, I think there's very few places in the world that are as good as Ireland.
I hear you. I hear you. And obviously, I'm wondering if having your mother being from the US, perhaps, that mindset, the American dream, the ambition and all of those things, like maybe you got inspired by it and maybe one day, you told yourself perhaps growing up that one day you would have your own business or make a big difference as a business person. I mean, would that be the case?
Yeah, I never thought about it exactly like that, but like when I do look at it, like some my mother's father, who was actually Irish, so ironically, full circle. He went to America during World War II. And became very successful construction company out in San Francisco. So, I did grow up around that you could achieve anything, and the US is a great place to do that for an Irish young Irish guy going over there in his kind of early 20s and to end up with a really successful big construction company in San Francisco shows like the opportunity that is America, and that ideology of the American dream is something that's very true. So I think I travel a lot to the US, or I used to travel a lot to the US before the last year, and look forward to going back again. But what does strike me in the US every time I'm there is the entrepreneurship, the ability to grow businesses, to live out your dream, and it can be a little bit corny, but it really is true over in the US.
Do you think
It's
that
and it's a place I admire greatly for that.
And do you think that maybe like now, as you've been able to compare and all of that, would you say that maybe in Dublin, things are there in Ireland, like things are starting to opening up a bit more, where you don't have to be a lawyer or a banker or a consultant, and it's still going to be well viewed if you decide to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's definitely coming more and more so. Like when you've got a lot of the big tech organizations here, Salesforce, Google, Facebook, a lot of the Stripe, a lot of the big ones have big headcounts here. Like from overseas, it can come across that they're here for tax purposes, but they're not. They're here for they've huge headcounts here. Like they've put down roots in the in Ireland as their European headquarters. So from when I finished college back in the early 2000s to now, it's wildly different in terms of the opportunities. Even when you look at the graduate rounds and the old milk rounds of going into the consulting firms, the big four accounting firms and the law firms, a lot of the top talent is looking elsewhere now to get into these different types of organizations. And there's not yet a clear path, which I think is interesting. We actually have a sister company called Grad Guide that's was kind of set up just to support that in terms of trying to help graduates into those, kind of find a path into those organizations. But yeah, I think definitely in Ireland, I think we are still slower than the US. I think we're still a bit more cautious than the US. So I think that if that impacts our kind of venture ecosystem, it's not as risk. as risky as the US, or risk doesn't have the risk appetite of the US. So, I still think we have a bit to go on that, but I certainly think we're going in the right direction.
Very cool. So in your case, like the direction that you took was to go to university and basically studying a combination of business and law. But very early on, you knew that being a lawyer was not your thing. So how did you come across, or how did you end up thinking that way?
Yeah, I think I wanted to be a lawyer because, for your kind of reasons that you said earlier, it was kind of it was a very stable, um, you know, somewhat sexy kind of thing to do, was to become a lawyer, or a banker, or an accountant. After one of the first in law, in first year in law in Ireland, two of your first courses are land law and constitutional law, and both of them put me to sleep very, very quickly. So I realized very, very early that I didn't have the discipline or the yeah to do that much reading around subjects that are just not that interesting. So very quickly I didn't really have the appetite for it, and focused more on the business side. And I've always loved maths and problem solving. So, like, even to this day, we're talking about payroll. It's around, mathematical numbers, analytics, and solutioning problems is really what what it is, or what global payroll is. And that's always something I really, really enjoyed, was, solutioning. Um, and in law, that takes a long, long time.
Absolutely. So then, as a result of that, you graduated. Then you got into retail, then management consultancy, and I guess this landed you eventually working at Taxback, and that's essentially where you really got exposed to the problem that you're currently solving with the business that you've started. But I'd like to hear like how that experience was for you, what you were seeing, especially when you went more on the international side, and how was that journey for you? Which was a pivotal kind of like initiation into perhaps you becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, like, so when I joined Taxback, we were the business at the time was really launching its first B2B product on the tax side. And Taxback, like, from its founder Terry Clune, who founded Taxback back in the mid '90s, coming out of university, to again to solve problems. So firstly, it's always an incredible entrepreneur, and still is to this day, an incredibly entrepreneurial environment to work in. It's about seizing opportunities that are global. Big and global is generally, when I speak to Terry, what the ambition and the drive is all about. So when I came in 2012, and in typical Taxback fashion, which I subsequently found out, what they were trying to do was tackle a big market that was dominated by um, very slow moving large organizations. At the time, it was the big four accountancy firms. So what we were going into was, assignment management, which is still a very complex piece of tax work that any organization that sends someone overseas has to manage, because you're managing tax and payroll in multiple jurisdictions at the same time, and understanding how that ends, and the customer service element of that with an accounting firm was, less than ideal, because you're dealing with two almost separate organizations, even though they may be the same name. Like the big four, they're generally kind of independent organizations. So you're dealing with two different people on two different sides of the assignment. And number one, it's a bad customer experience, and number two, it's very costly for the organization. So, the group had noticed that through doing a lot of individual tax returns for people abroad, seeing the amount of corporates who just couldn't deal with that, so they ended up paying for it themselves. So we launched a product, the global mobility product, and we went straight into pitching it against the big four in big organizations. So I think that's part of our DNA and our ethos, is to really go after, problems that are on a global scale and try and solution them utilizing technology. And we did that from day one in the tax element of global mobility, and we won a number of big projects in that, very early days, which kind of gave us the momentum to continue going.
And payroll obviously was became quite a substantial thing, that that it was kind of like a breakthrough moment where the company perhaps understood that a spin-off or allocating more time and resources to it was what it makes sense. So why don't you walk us through that process, through that sequence of events, because the people that are listening, maybe they may be a little bit more used to coming up with an idea and then really launching it and giving their notice, at the corporation that they're working at. But in this case, obviously there was an idea that came up, that you were part of it, and that essentially ended up being a spin-off where you still had the partnership of the company that you were working at.
Yeah, so like in global mobility tax, like one of the core key elements of it is payroll. So to do the withholding of tax for assignees abroad, payroll is one of the main attributes to be able to do that. So we were running an element of payroll in doing what we were doing, but yeah, like I'll never forget it. So myself and Mark Graham, who's our chief commercial officer now, sat down with Terry in the office one day, and we were kind of mapping out a strategy as to, we felt that we needed to rebrand our section of Taxback to give it a more standalone feel, because taxback.com at the time still is a very successful B2C business. A lot of it's based on student tax returns and, the transient workforce. And so we felt that that was confusing to our customer base when we were pitching to big corporates. So, at the time we were talking about renaming a section of the business, but it actually ended up turning out into something much bigger. Because we sat down with Terry, and I think, like most brilliant entrepreneurs, they look at things very simply at times. They take away a lot of the confusion or a lot of the hypothesis. And we looked at it, and we had a huge demand for running payroll on a local level for our, like a local international level for our big customers. A lot of demand was coming to us to do that for them. And quite simply, I'll never forget it. We sat there, and Terry said, everyone in the world gets paid all of the time. Like, there's a very small proportion of them are expats. So why don't we target the bigger market instead of the smaller market? Which was a big shift in mentality for us, and it was out of our comfort zone, because we were, at the time, we were very, very good at what we did, and we were very, very good at selling what we did. So to somewhat put a pause on that and go in a totally different direction and start from scratch again was a bit of a deep breath moment. But when you look back on it, it's absolutely correct. Like, the international payroll market was completely underserved, no utilization of technology, and the market is massive to go and attack. So, and I think that shows now in what our customer looks like, our average customer size, our revenue growth, shows that we made the right decision.
That's amazing. And I know that once you made that decision, coming up with a name was also an interesting process. So tell us about coming up with a name.
Yeah, I'd never done it before. So there was, I remember who was there at the time. It was myself, Mark, Christine, who's our kind of head of tax, Barry, who's now our head of customer, actually. They were on the tax side at the time, and we were still trying to figure out who we were and what we were going to be. But it came down that we hired a company marketing advertising company to do it, and they came back with four options, and I was outvoted 4-1 for a different name than Immedis. But I really wanted Immedis because I liked the story behind it. Eventually, I ended up winning because the other one that was voted for was going to cost us €200,000 to buy the domain name. So I decided to go with Immedis,
Good stuff.
and I'm delighted we did.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting process, and yeah, one that goes deeper than I thought it would. In
It
terms
always
of
is.
understanding the
Most of the time,
feelings.
those URLs, they're like so expensive that it just makes sense to come up with something that is a little bit more affordable. That's for sure. So, but I guess for Rory, for the people that are listening, to really get an idea of Immedis and the way that it works and how you guys are making money, what ended up being the business model?
Yeah, so we're an international, we're a global payroll platform. That's what we do. We've developed a technology platform that consolidates global payroll for large enterprise companies. And so, in essence, our main customer profile is, big organizations that have already deployed a global HCM, the likes of a Workday, SuccessFactors, Oracle, Ceridian, or a UKG. And we integrate with their platform, because in most cases they'll run the US payroll out of those systems, and then we integrate to run all of their rest of world population through a single platform. So we consolidate the whole operation, of a global payroll, from input up through the HCM, time and attendance system, all the way through to the outputs into the financial management systems and into the employees and pay slips, and manage all of the payment flows and treasury flows all across the world. So we're generally dealing with customers that are in 10 countries plus, with over 1,000 people outside of their home jurisdiction. So a lot of a lot of big named organizations out of the US, a lot, and Europe is where we're dealing with. So yeah, like they're big partnerships that we have. They're long-term partnerships, and it's a very important thing for anyone to get paid on time. So um, we've continued to invest in the platform itself, and I think we're kind of proud to say that I think the technology we've developed in it is certainly very different and game changing than the very old school approach that payroll had for a long, long time.
And I guess in terms of raising capital, because I mean, here you're talking about investing and allocating resources into the development of the platform. I mean, obviously that requires money, and everything requires money if you want to build something that is hyper growth. So I guess how much capital have you guys raised to date?
First round we did 25 million euros through SEP, Scottish Equity Partners out of London. Been a brilliant partner for us. And then just before Christmas last year, we raised $50 million from Lead Edge Capital in New York. And again, like a really great organization, working with Keith and Brian, and from both organizations has been, very different to what I think some of the scare stories of venture capital and private equity are, so far anyway.
No, absolutely. And I'm sure that the journey for you has been remarkable. I mean, going from 10 employees to over 330 that you have today, I'm sure that at some point, that growth maybe gave you some vertigo, no, of the height, and how fast, how quickly you were climbing. So how has it been for you? Because, I know that for founders, typically it's not an easy journey. People think that, it's easy, but it's not, because you need to grow at the same pace as the company is growing. So how were you able to grow yourself at that same speed?
Yeah, two points. Like internally, we use the term sustainable hypergrowth. So when we went for both fundings, it's probably the most critical thing that we talk about is capability to continue to serve, because this market has been underserved historically, and the technology has let a lot of good ideas down because of either an underinvestment or a misunderstanding of the domain. It is a complicated domain, and it requires significant investment and understanding. So, capability now from someone who's come from the commercial background, I would say I now spend the vast majority of my time on the operational and execution side of the business because it's so important. Um, which kind of plays into how have I grown. Um, I've hired really, really good people around me, I think is the best way to put it. I think the executive management team that we have now comes from from Mark, who co-founded it with me, Christine on the same side, on the tax side, two of the best at what they do, and then Richard Limkin on the technology side, George and Kevin on the finance side, and now we've just hired Andrew Desmond as a COO, former head of financial services for Accenture. So, we haven't been afraid to hire the best in their fields to come and support the organization, and that helps me. And when I see businesses, I think some founder-led businesses or entrepreneur businesses, what they really struggle to do is listen, and they really struggle to hire talent around them that will put them under pressure. And I think that's something that it's not something I've ever been afraid to do, and thankfully, it's not something that worries me. So having the best people you can have in that organization. So it's not just having 330 bodies; it's the talent level that comes with that. I think the team internally are sick of me talking about the Netflix book around talent density, but I don't agree with everything in it. But I think the talent density piece is probably one of the single biggest enablers to hypergrowth.
And it's interesting, that you touched on listening. I find that listening is everything, whether it's to customers, to employees, or to investors. So, would you mind expanding a little bit more on what you meant with listening there?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Listening is so important, especially when you're in a global organization like we are, dealing with global customers, global teams. How people approach a solution or look for help differs from place to place, and So you've got to actually listen to understand what the problem is, or what the pitch is, or what the plan is. And I think listening, so you can actually understand. I think context is really, really important. So understanding the context of someone's decision or someone's motivation is really important before you actually make a decision on whether it's right or wrong, or how to deal with it. And I think being too snappy in your decision making, or being too reactive or too aggressive in your decision making based on not listening is um, is really bad culturally for an organization. I think it puts fear into the organization. Whereas I think listening, and really, as you mentioned, listening to our customers, I think there's a lot of number of businesses around the world who think they have the best idea in the world, but they've never actually asked anyone who's going to use it whether it's the best idea in the world, or whether it's just the best idea in their own heads. So we do customer forums, we do customer workshops, customer think-ins a lot. We want to know what's going to make a difference for them, as opposed to us kind of prescribing what's going to be best for them. So I think both on the customer side, in terms of evolving your product in that way, it's critical to listen to the market and to your customers. And internally, from a cultural standpoint, during hypergrowth, I just think listening is there's more. It's more important
Yeah, and
than most things,
and
I
and
think.
on the hypergrowth side, also you guys have the M&A side that you've been quite active on. I mean, you closed this acquisition as well that I'm sure that really helped in taking things to the next level. Unfortunately, as they say, most acquisitions fail because it's just like part of the integration process. But I guess in this case, it seems that things definitely worked out for you guys. Also it gave you presence in the US, but walk us through how that journey was and how you ensured that this was going to succeed.
Yeah, the acquisition piece is interesting, because when you look at it now, it was a really good decision and a great idea, and has worked out well. If you were to look back at the reasoning as to why we did it, and what we thought we were going to gain from it, and how we were going to do it, this is back to the theoretical versus the actual. The theory and the actual were very, very different. I think that's one of the big learnings. You can come up with all these great ideas, but life gets in the way. So the acquisition, ultimately, Expedicore was a partner of ours prior. So, like, we knew the team, we knew some of their customers. Um, but I think how we had managed envisaging the changeover to it, was a lot more difficult and slower than what we thought it would be. So it cost a lot more money to do it, um, in terms of our own time and capital to actually implement the change and migrate the customers, and the opportunity cost was probably greater. Now, the outcome was probably greater eventually than we thought it was going to be, um, later on. But I think that first 18 months, because it was my idea in the first place. So when I was reporting back to the board, it was, it wasn't always comfortable in terms of how it was going, but we always believed that it was the right decision, and that the basic fundamentals as to why we were trying to do it were right. But the actual tactical execution of it changed so greatly, and that's down to people. It's down to people and culture, and the one thing that you don't know until you really work closely with people, and it's not for the right or wrong, is their cultural desire, in terms of, is their vision the same as ours. And that was the area that we probably took for granted that it was, um, without questioning it deeply enough. And then the knock-on impact of that had over an 18-month period was not overly challenging on the business, but it was, thankfully, because we had the support of a big group behind us. But and thankfully we got a good outcome in the end of it. But yeah, looking back on it now, when I look back on my notes and my business case and going, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do it, this is what the outcome is going to be, like, you might as well, that's probably a work of fiction now at this stage.
That's incredible. And I guess on your side too, you must have access to a tremendous amount of data as well. So I guess from a customer perspective, I mean, how have they grown over time? I mean, what are some of the insights or some of the things that you've seen?
Yeah, we were very lucky in, like, it wasn't a business strategy to go into the verticals. Or sorry, it was a strategy to go into the verticals we're in. It wasn't a strategy that we knew COVID was going to come. But I suppose the main verticals were in our big tech, pharma, and financial services. So they're all very resilient, but specifically in big tech and some of the financial services, specifically in the fund management that we're in, they have just seen, like, the fund management especially is a highly acquisitive um, um, part of vertical. So a lot of our organizations, they're acquiring lots of businesses, and seeing as our revenue model is based off of headcount, like, those companies grow astronomically with us. Like, some of them can grow 3-4x with us just by buying companies over a 2-3 year period. Their headcount grows that quickly. And same in the tech and cyber. Those organizations are growing not only their headcount in the jurisdictions they're in, but growing into new jurisdictions all the time. So, our average, when we look at the metrics, like, our average over a 3 year period, net revenue retention is like 195%. Which is, until we kind of really got into the details last year, was like, an eye opener, for us to understand that, on average, our company's almost double what we expect their ARR contract to be to what it eventually is after only a 3 year period. So to be able to grow new business at about kind of 60-70% CAGR, and then on top of that for your underlying business to grow at that rate as well, it gives it a nice mix and a nice rocket underneath the bonnet.
Absolutely. So imagine, Rory, that you go to sleep tonight and you wake up in a world where the vision of Immedis is fully realized. What does that world look like?
Yeah, good question. Our vision is very clear. Like, we want to be the first real-time global payroll platform in the world. Nobody's got anywhere near it. We've got in our mission, we've got the process to a touchless payroll process on a global scale through a single platform, something that had never really been done before. And our vision is to be like, I don't like aligning it, but it's similar to being the Workday and global payroll, where, from a customer user experience and an automation standpoint, we are the undoubted number one. And when I say the undoubted number one, I mean the undoubted number one for really good organizations. And we're not a product, nor do we seek to be a product at the moment. And we do have the capability to do it, but I think where we are right now, in the next 3 years, the enterprise market is big enough. So if we can be, what I would say internally, if we can be the best of what we do for the best organizations in the world, we're going to be really successful in hitting our numbers. I think, like, we're on track to hit 100 million in recurring revenue over that period, in that 3 year period. So that would be a great milestone to hit as well.
So
And that's all through organic growth.
organic growth. I mean, that's like the holy
Yeah.
grail. So that's amazing. So then, why don't you expand on that? I mean, how do you guys think about organic growth, and why? At what point do you make that decision? Because obviously now, people get really lost very quickly with going into advertising and allocating a bunch of money into that. So how did you guys really think about organic growth as you were thinking about strategy?
Yeah, like all of our growth to date's been organic predominantly, outside of the acquisition back in 2017, which wasn't really a revenue growth. It wasn't really a revenue acquisition. So, we've gone from basically zero to 35 million in that period of time in contract recurring revenue, all organically. Um, and we'll finish this year north of 50 million. So, um, number of number of uh, routes to market on that. Like, as an organization, when we started off, we were, like most startups, a scrappy organization, probably a little bit of guerrilla sales, on the ground in some of the main areas like the American Payroll Association. We were very targeted in what we did around certain webinars for specific buying cohorts. And as we've grown that out, we've built now, partnerships with Workday, Ceridian, Ultimate, SAP, and Oracle. So, the channel sales side now is really, really increasing greatly. So, and then obviously with the marketing piece, our marketing team now, in terms of, inbound sales and how much we spend now around digital marketing, etc., with the two capital rounds, has allowed us to do a lot more of it, which has kind of increased our pipeline. And we've increased the sales team quite significantly. We were very, in the first round of funding, was very focused on capability and execution. Um, so, we do a lot of sales through refer. We did, or historically, a lot through referral sales, and we have very strong customer references, which is tough to get in payroll. So, we're now being begun to being spoken about a lot more. But the commercial team now is 40, 45 people. So, we've invested quite heavily in that, and so we have a mixture of go to market from kind of a direct sales model, the marketing, and the channel. But we've back to people. We've spent time and money to get good people in there, which helps.
Of course.
And I think our average deal size, so we're not to hit our numbers. You're talking 40, 50 deals a year. It's not as if we're and the recurring element of it, recurring revenue element of it is really good. So, I think that's why it's so exciting. As we continue to turn the dial and the opportunity that's in the market. So, like to me, global payroll is still so like untapped. Like that, the greenfield or brownfield is still out there is massive. The amount of our customers are still the high majority of our customers are and prospects are consolidating for the first time. So it still shows how much market share is out there to grab.
Very cool. So one of the questions that I have, Rory, typically here for the guests that come on the show is, imagine if you have the opportunity to go back in time. So I put you into this time machine back to 2016 or even earlier when the idea of Immedis, like really came into perspective. If you had the opportunity of going back in time and having a chat with your younger self, and during that chat, you could give yourself one piece of business advice before launching a company, what would that be and why, given what you know now?
Good question. Look after the back end of the organization, I would say. We're growing, and we grew very quickly, and we continue to grow very quickly. But having someone who understands a lot of companies I find are either product driven or sales driven. But understanding the operational side of the business is crucial. So I would have hired somebody who understood FP&A, data, reporting capabilities a little bit earlier than we did. So I would advise myself to not always think about just the go forward. Look at, what has to come behind you. So what is the organizational debt that you have to manage? And bring someone in to do it. Bring someone in who's really, really good, who sits at the top table to do it, and that will allow you to focus just purely on looking forward.
I love it. So, Rory, for the folks that are listening, what is the best way for them to reach out and say hi?
Yeah, so obviously the website, Immedis.com. I'm always open to anyone who wants to talk to me for Ruairi.Kelleher@Immedis.com. I think it's kind of one of our core components of our own organization where anyone wants to talk to me. As I said earlier on, I think you can gain a lot from listening. So you don't always have to take it on board, but it helps. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me.
Amazing.
LinkedIn as well.
Amazing. Well, Rory, thank you so much for being on the Deal Maker Show today.
Thanks, Alejandro. Pleasure to be with you.